Ruslan.
Simp bullying, the Equality Act, my overall thoughts on the public education system. I'm going to be talking about all of it. I know some of you guys are like, Ruslan, what is simp bullying? Oh, I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to propose two solutions that I don't think are mutually exclusive. I actually think they go hand in hand, that will hopefully give you some type of framework in terms of how to deal with all this kind of stuff. Now, I've been married to my wife. It'll be 13 years in July. My son, Levi, is 6. And we have another baby on the way. So I am a dad, I'm a father, I'm a husband. And this stuff does hit home, especially the possible implications of stuff like the Equality Act, which I'm gonna talk about here in a second. This article came out on CNN. I meant to cover this a while ago. Look at the title. The new slang teens use to insult boys who are too nice to girls. So this is on the front page of CNN maybe a week ago. Shannon was used to her socially awkward son being bullied by other boys at the private school she attends in Atlanta. But when she picked him up from school in mid-January and her 8th grader told her he was being called a simp, Shannon, who's only using her first name to protect her son's identity, didn't know what to think. He's telling me, and I'm driving, and I'm trying to make sense of it. I've never heard of the word. Now, guys, simp's not a new word, all right? We called people this stuff back in high school, pre-Jesus, all the time, all right? A simp is the way you objectify women, and boys unfortunately objectify women, is the desired position when you're a idiot teenager is to be a quote-unquote pimp, and a simp is someone that is the opposite of a pimp. There's your education for the day in terms of slang, pop culture slang. He told me it basically means that I'm just being nice to girls because I like them, she said. I was like, wait, my kid's being picked on for being too nice to girls. Her son told her he'd recently been put in the friend zone, also not a new term, by one of the girls who made it clear she wasn't interested in dating him. They continued to be friendly. You do all these things as a parent to raise your kid right, to be nice to everyone, especially kids without many friends, Shannon said. And you never think that by making your kid the nice one, you could be moving them a target for bullies. This is front page news on CNN. Now, why am I bringing this up? Because as someone that's raising his son to treat women with respect, to respect boundaries, to not be a deviant, to not objectify women and try to be a pimp or try to be a playboy, this stuff is important to me as a father. And this is, to me, indicative of a greater issue with education by and large. And I would be livid if my son got teased for being a simp, for doing the right thing and respecting women. That's hilarious to me from one standpoint, but it would be utterly infuriating from another standpoint. So the question of the public education system, or in this situation, private schools, is interesting to say the least. And what is the solution for those of us who are trying to raise our children in the Lord? How do we navigate this? What do me and my family do? I'm going to get into all of that here in just a second. Another thing that came up recently is this thing called the Equality Act, which potentially has some really wild ramifications for religious organizations, potentially can force people more or less to use, I guess, certain pronouns. And, you know, who knows how bad it's actually going to play out, and is this actually going to impact religious liberty and the ability to teach the scriptures and all these kind of things? Or is this like kind of like another thing that is the end of the world, like every year or every other year there's some other issue that everybody's freaking out about? I don't know. But it does pose some important questions for those of us who are Christians, who are raising kids, who are in society. How do we deal with this? How does it all play out? And I was raised in a public school system. Was I ever called a simp? I think I've probably been called a simp before. It's a term we've frequently used. I took sex ed classes in high school and junior high classes where we talked about not just education of, you know, the biology of sex and watching a birth video. That happened. Fairly traumatic. I wish my parents would have talked to me about this. They didn't. But we did talk about stuff like, you know, LGBTQ, trans, so on and so forth. Was it mandated? Was it not mandated? Could my parents have opted out? I will tell you this. In my home, I'm the one that's having very early conversations, not a conversation, but conversations about all of these topics, about respecting women, about what is the biology of sex and what is a sperm, and the mom has the egg. And we haven't gotten into like the pleasure side of sex, but we've definitely explained how a baby is formed and all these different things from a very early age. And so I do believe we should be having these conversations. But by and large, if we're sending our kids to public schools, and this is the kind of stuff they're going to be exposed to, it does raise some concerns. There's a couple things I think of. One, I went to public school. I turned out all right, more or less, right? And there was all kinds of debauchery that was happening at school. There was kids using cocaine and hard drugs and popping ecstasy when I was in school back from the year 1999 to 2003 when I was in high school. This stuff is not new. Being called a simp is not new. Getting bullied is not new. However, as a parent, you don't want your kids to go through this stuff, and you don't want them exposed, and you don't want them to be bullied or mistreated. The ultimate thing I will say is this. For starters, you have to be more influential in your kids' life than the public school system. I have a lot of beef with the public school system for a variety of reasons. Let's just talk about the history of the public school system for starters. The public school system pre-education as we know it today, the kids actually worked in industries, right? They were farmers initially, and it wasn't that parents were mean, it was just that they needed all the kids they had to survive. And so that is a history of American where kids worked very early, and then they went and worked in the factories. And what they more or less created was a system for kids to come out of factories, go to school, and the schools almost conditioned them to at some point go back and work for the factories because the parents needed to work. They needed something to do with their kids. This is the Industrial Revolution. You guys could look up Seth Godin. There's a whole talk about the history of education. So I initially just have a problem with education by and large. I think it's wildly inefficient. I think it's wildly ineffective. And my deeper issue with education is when we're talking about the Equality Act, when we're talking about stuff like simps and what is normal, is our education system is obsessed with indoctrinating kids and teaching kids what to think. And a healthy, true education is all about teaching someone how to think. And that's some of what we do here on this channel is I try to teach you guys how to think about the Bible, how to think about the world, how to think about all these different things. So we do need to understand that education in America is flawed. Okay. Second of all, as a Christian, this whole notion that we're entitled to a free education for our kids or whatever is a fairly modern concept, like literally a couple of 100 years old. This hasn't been historical. Historically, you know what parents did? They educated their own kids, right? And a lot of times they weren't very educated. They worked on farms and they worked in the family business. This was common all throughout history. It still is common in parts of the world. And so to assume that because we're in America, we're supposed to get this education for our kids. And not only that, the education also has to reflect our values. I think it's just a fallacy because the truth is they are indoctrinating your kids into something, and unfortunately, the big idea is they're indoctrinating them into being worker bees. They're not indoctrinating them into financial literacy. They're not indoctrinating them into being critical thinkers. They're not indoctrinating them to becoming entrepreneurs and changing their family trees. They're not indoctrinating them on how to get their money into assets that increase in value. They're educating them on how to be consumers and good little worker bees, to be little cogs in the wheel, and to keep everything going. So I have an issue with education by and large, which is why for me and my family, what we did is we took the education into our home. Now, I know you guys are thinking, I used to think this too, Ruslan, you homeschool, a Christian homeschool kids, they're so weird, they're kind of awkward, so on and so forth. I too used to think the same thing until I got around some really cool kids that did homeschool, they did charter school, they did all the above, and they turned out good. And I'll give you two examples. John Keith is a good friend of mine I did a lot of music with. He was homeschooled, I believe, all the way through high school. And his parents loved the Lord, and he would essentially get all of his schoolwork done very quickly because he was very smart. And then he did stuff like become an incredible piano player, become an incredible drummer, and he turned out more or less okay. And he didn't get exposed to all the debauchery in the public school system. I'll give you another example. Zach Sparazzo, who was partly homeschooled, part charter, and he was able to graduate. He works with me now, but before he was working with me, he jumped out, went to a charter school, graduated at 18, had a 6-figure business as a videographer. By the time he was like 20, 21, got married at 2021, is able to provide for his wife, is doing fine. All right. And so if I have the privilege, if I have the opportunity to raise my kids in the ways of the Lord, I'm going to do that. I'm going to remove them from environments that could be problematic, where they could be called a simp, where they could be instituted to think like a worker bee, where they can be indoctrinated into things that maybe I don't agree with. And I have chosen to do this. Me and my family have chosen to do this. This is a popular chapter from Joshua chapter 24. The children of Israel who are having issues with where their devotion is, with what is most convenient to their lifestyle and where they ultimately want to put their faith. And Joshua 24:15 says, but if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, if it's too hard, whether it's following God in your home, whether it's following God in the marketplace, whether it's just following God and not worshiping idols, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates, or the gods of the Amorites, right? So the false gods your ancestors served, or the gods of these people that aren't even God's children, these folks over here, in whose land you are living, right? But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. We will serve the Lord. As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. And I'm not going to position my son to be in situations where he can be bullied for godly behavior. No, that's not happening. And the other day, Levi was at church, and this is frustrating when this kind of stuff happens at church. He was at church, and I looked over, I saw him playing with a big kid, and I saw him do this thing where he went like, rah! And then this other kid looked back at him, and he went, rah! And then Levi like sprinted away, ran, and like kind of sat down. I thought they were playing. Well, he pulled us to the side and felt like he was being bullied. This kid was visiting from another church, and he said, Dad, I have to go home. He said, I have to go home and I have to train so that next time when he does this, I'm going to show him who's boss. And my wife was like, now, Levi, you know that violence is not the answer. What you have to do in a situation like that is come get us, because we're there, we're in proximity with you, and let us deal with it. This is a last resort. And so he misunderstood the protocol. But he was ready to take on this kid who was, no joke, about a foot taller than him and probably about 75 pounds heavier. This is a big kid. What is the point here? The point is that he felt a certain way, and that anger, that feeling of, ooh, if something goes down, I'm not able to handle myself. That anger is what drove him, that feeling of being helpless is what drove him to come home and say, you know what? I'm going to use this opportunity to train so that if this ever happens again, I'm going to show him who's boss. I'm going to be able to control the variables so that I'm never vulnerable and I'm never in a position where I can be attacked. And so in my life, with my family, I'm never going to do this thing where I'm going to leave them exposed. I'm going to leave them to be attacked. I understand I can't control every variable, but things like who's educating my son, by the grace of God, I get to control. Things like who's he around, and am I around kids that are new kids? And this is maybe 30, 40 feet away. I thought they were playing. My mistake. I could have been more engaged, but nevertheless, it happened. It happened at church. You don't think this kind of stuff will happen at church? And to be completely honest, there's even the possibility that the kid didn't know Levi was taking it as bullying, that the kid may have even been special needs, so on and so forth. But that anger that he had fueled him to get serious about working out more, which is hilarious. So he's doing his push-ups. He's up to 3 pull-ups. He's always been a fairly active kid. And so my question to you is, are there things that you feel threatened by in society? What are you using that anger for? Are you using that anger to otherize? Are you using that anger to be frustrated? Are you using that anger to complain? Are you using that anger to be a victim? Or are you using that anger to fuel you to do something about the situation, the unforeseen danger that maybe you're putting yourself and your family in, right? Think about this for a second. A lot of you guys have issues with the Equality Act. The Equality Act, and I'm not trying to flex, and I'm not trying to sound like I'm coming from this crazy position of privilege, even though I am, but the Equality Act is not a variable for me. It really isn't, because my son is not in the public school system. He's homeschooled, and they do a co-op group once a week, and then he goes to a church over here where he does a martial arts. If you're a Christian, and this is why I talk about financial literacy. If you're a Christian in 2021, 2022, in this era, and you have an issue with where you think the world's going and all these different things, and I'm not even the most like, oh my gosh, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. I think revival is going to happen. But if you're concerned, which we all should be to a certain degree, well then, listen, you should be more influential on your kids in the public education system. You really should be. But if you still don't feel like that's possible in my situation, guess what? We decided to be a family where there's a single income family, which, by the way, if you look at single income family versus dual income families, I know this is going to get offensive. I know some of you guys are going to get really offended, but by and large, families with one income end up actually netting and taking home more than families with two incomes. Why? Because when you factor in things like childcare, when you factor in things like gas, when you factor in things like eating out more, when you factor in things like dry cleaning, when you factor in all these other things, that a dual family income actually nets less and takes home less. This was a huge value of ours very early in our marriage. And so guess what? We built our lives and we built our revenue streams in a way where my wife could stay home. I'm not saying this as an absolute. I'm not trying to shame anybody if this is not where you're at. But what I'm saying to you is, if this is a value of yours, if you want to have kids and you're concerned about these things, well then, maybe there's some changes that need to be made. Well, then maybe you need to take that anger and that frustration inside of your heart to what you're seeing going on in the world, and maybe you need to rearrange how you're going about your businesses. And I'm gonna give you guys a really good, tangible tip that I've used before in just a second, but I wanna give you guys this passage. And again, this is not a passage to shame anybody. This is not a passage to make anybody feel bad, but these are the type of passages that lit a fire under me and said, Ruslan, I gotta do something different. I gotta do something different with the way I'm raising my family. 1 Timothy 5:8, but if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than a non-believer. Okay, this is specifically talking about the church caring for widows, and more or less what he's saying is, hey, you know, we have to care for those widows that are in the family and those relatives. You can't just, load off everything on the church. We have to be able to take care of our own relatives, right? But then it says, and especially for the members of his household. Now, this is a completely different economic climate. This is a completely different time in history, right? And he says he has denied the faith and is worse than a non-believer. That's a scary passage to say that someone's denied the faith and is worse than a non-believer. So why do I keep talking about financial literacy, getting out of debt, getting on a budget, earning more money, all of these different things? Because you can literally direct the path that your family and the trajectory of your family and the lack of strain on your kids, the lack of strain on your marriage, the lack of strain on your family by controlling the variables like what you do for a living, like how much money you make, like where you live, and really position your life where you could be most effective. So here's a very, very simple financial tip. And hopefully if you're younger, if you're not yet married, if maybe you're just dating, maybe you're married without kids yet, this is a very simple tip that I really want you guys to consider. When we're looking at earning more money so that maybe we want to become a single income household. Maybe it's for a season. Maybe when we want to give more to the church. Maybe we want to homeschool our kids. One of the parents comes home, homeschools your kids. If you want to figure that out, one of the best things you can do is figure out a job or a career path where you're getting paid for results and not getting paid for time. If you're getting paid for time, you're always going to be trading time for money, time for money, time for money. Well, we know that time is arguably the most important asset we have. And so if you're always trading time for money, time for money, time for money, it doesn't position you to actually build wealth long term to the point where you could leave an inheritance for your grandchildren the way Proverbs says. And so figure out something that you can do where you're not trading time for money, you are trading results for money. You deliver a product, some type of content, you deliver some type of service, you deliver some type of transaction where it's not about the amount of time you spent doing it, because if you're efficient at it, initially it's gonna be hard to learn, I don't know, let's just say real estate. It's gonna be hard to get into real estate. It's gonna take you a long time to get your first sale in real estate. All these things are initially going to be super hard at first, but over time, you'll get more and more and more and more efficient. And then what used to cost you, I don't know, 50 hours to make $5,000, now it costs you 10 hours to make $5,000, or it can cost you 5 hours to make $5,000. You're trading money for results. You're providing value and results for people, and therefore you're not just renting out your time for money, which is what we're conditioned to do by the public education system, which I don't like, but you're trading value and creating results for somebody in exchange for time. You can help people. Say you're super crafty on TikTok and you don't really know how to make money. You can find a local business that's trying to get popping on TikTok. You can go in, you can say, hey, I'll create all your social media content for you, and I'll charge you $2,000 a month for it. And they go, oh, great, $2,000 a month, right? And for them, that's a good trade-off. And for you, that $2,000 a month may only take you 10 hours a week to do. Why? Because you're efficient at TikTok and social media. Okay, that's just an idea. And this is literally how like a Zach Sparazzo built his business. He got a couple of different businesses. He would create their social media content for them. Some of that stuff he spent a little bit of time on. Some of that stuff he spent a lot of time on, but it created flexibility and it allowed him to earn more. And so if you're a Christian, you're in culture, you're concerned, one of the best things you could do is learn financial literacy and learn valuable, scarce skills that you could trade for results, that you could trade for money and results, instead of just trading your hours and being another cog in the wheel of the system where you're trained to be a worker bee and forever stay stuck in the loop that the rest of society is plugged into. And no, this is not easy. This is not easy. This is actually very difficult, because not only do you have to have scarce skills, you also need to be relational. You also need to have a good personality. You also need to be friendly. You also need to be relatable. You also need to get your network popping. All of these different things come together, but by the grace of God, over the course of decades, this is how me and my wife have been able to live our lives in a way where I don't have to be anywhere at any specific time. I have flexibility, right? I have freedom, but at the same time, I work my butt off and I get a better return for my hours spent, whether it's doing YouTube, whether it's creating music, because I'm creating assets all the time. Your personal brand, if you want to get into the content space, is an asset, believe it or not, because the more you invest in your name, the more your name can create a return for you. This is why a Basquiat painting is worth more than some random painting you see at your dentist office, right? Because there's this value invested in that person. So these are things I want you guys to be thinking about. The education system, by and large, is extremely flawed, and don't be conditioned to just think you just got to be some worker bee that forever stays, oh, just got to do this. Guess my kids got to go to public school. Guess they got to get bullied for respecting women and liking women. No, you don't. No, you don't. You get to choose, right? You get to choose the kind of life you build, right? And this is not overnight. This is not overnight. This is not easy. This is extremely hard. This is one of the hardest things you'll ever do, is learning these skills and having the right mentality to be able to go into the world, add value to the marketplace, and then turn around and create the type of flexibility that, if we're talking historically, if we're talking in scripture times, they weren't concerned about what their kids were gonna be taught in public schools, because public schools didn't even exist. Okay? Like, we are so privileged and afforded the opportunity of even educating our kids. This is a relatively modern phenomenon. The world was utterly illiterate 600 years ago. Consider the time that we're in, and consider the opportunities that are in front of us, and the opportunities to win back our families, our homes, our time, and also influence and further the gospel with these things. So hopefully this is making sense. I appreciate you guys rocking with me. Super side note, we're working on an e-course for those of you guys that are considering dabbling into the YouTube creator space. This is not for young people. This is not for lazy people. This is for folks who have a degree of expertise, have something important to say. That's in the description. But I wanted to just kind of tie all this together. Some of you guys want to know what I think about the Equality Act. Some of you guys want to know what we do for education. That's what we do for education, right? And it's not easy to build your life in a way. Yes, we had to get out of debt first. Yes, I had to earn more money to create the opportunity for my wife to stay stay at home. But this stuff can happen, but it takes a long time and it takes a lot of focus and it takes a lot of sacrifice. So hopefully this was helpful. I want to hear from you guys.
Kingstream Entertainment. Ruslan.
Joshua the King came down and bore it all. Yeah, conversations front of the fireplace. All of my mistakes, how do I erase? Wanna operate at a higher pace. Birth pains causing the body to dilate. On a first name basis with the worst pain.